Zach, we are back and we are diving into some moves to make heading into week 7 of the fantasy football season, the first bye-apocalypse of the season. We're going to be talking about some of these players and how to attack this bye. But first off, Zach, anybody watching, first move to make is obviously liking the video, commenting down below your thoughts. What moves are you trying to make this week and what you think of our moves that we are trying to make and we're suggesting? We're talking a lot of running backs this week. Zach, you got the first one on the docket. What do you got here?
I'm going to do a buy low trade target here, Bob. Anytime we do one of these, it's never a sexy name at the time that we're saying it. So I want to start with that because I know what the feeling is as soon as I say his name, but I'm trying to buy Dameon Pierce right now. Now, I'm not trying to do this on a rebuilding team. I'm trying to do this on a team that needs some running back help, that is, stuck right now where we're this volatile running back market right now where, we're looking at like Jordan Mason and Amari DeMarcado and Damian Williams and all these guys getting carries who you've never heard of. So I'm not doing this on a rebuilding team, but if I'm a contending team or I need a little bit of running back help, I'm doing this. Now, I'm also not doing this for a first round pick. I'm not buying Dameon Pierce for a first round pick. And I think that's the price that he was going at before the season. Because I remember after the NFL draft, we were all talking about like, oh man, Dameon Pierce is a big winner because they added Devin Singletary in free agency, but they didn't draft anyone else to compete with him. I don't think his role has changed. I know that last week he had like 35% of the snaps, but I'm really not too concerned about that because I don't think that Devin Singletary is a better running back than Dameon Pierce. And when I look into the future beyond this season of Dameon Pierce, do I think the Texans could bring someone in via the draft? Yeah, but what running back can you not say that about? There are so few running backs that you cannot say, like even Kenneth Walker was not safe from that last year. Every year teams are bringing in running backs to compete. And that doesn't really scare me in terms of, buying a running back. So I'm trying to buy Dameon Pierce. I'm trying to do it for a second round pick. Now, look, if that second round pick, like if I said if you're a contending team, that's probably a late round second pick. So you might have to add a little bit more to that. You can probably add like maybe a third round pick. I wouldn't want to, just me personally, because I like my third round picks. Can I get a second and a fourth? Can I get a 24 second and a 25 third round pick for Dameon Pierce? Listen, in terms of his production on the field, right now he's an RB24. My strategy here is to start engaging the Dameon Pierce owner, and I might even wait another week, Bob. And here's why. This is the psychology of fantasy football right here. Dameon Pierce has a bye this week. That means that his running back ranking is going to go down no matter what. So it's a little bit easier to buy Dameon Pierce if he's the running back 31 as opposed to the running back 24. And that's going to happen after he doesn't play this week. While this category is moves to make right now, try to make this move now, but try again next week because you might be able to gain that statistical advantage of, hey, he's an RB3 now, as opposed to being an RB2, whereas all these other running backs are going to have 7 weeks under their belt, and Dameon Pierce is only going to have 6. His RB ranking is going to drop a little bit. So I know it's not a sexy name, but I still believe in the talent. I believe in the situation. I don't care if they bring another running back in next year. He's got 2 more years left on his rookie deal after this. You know my strategy of where I stand at the running back position in Dynasty Fantasy Football. I'm only buying running backs on their rookie contract. Whether that's the first year, the second year, that's my position on running backs. I'm no longer investing in I got so much Miles Sanders I'm being burned on right now. I'm just not doing it anymore. And the thing is, they can probably just move off Miles Sanders right now next year if they want. So I'm only buying running backs on rookie contracts. And for that reason, I'm trying to buy low on Dameon Pierce here, Bob.
Yeah, he was a guy coming into the season I felt really good about producing. You looked at what's so funny about this is we were all me. I was expecting that this offense would take off a little slower in the passing game. That has clearly not been the case. This passing game is doing very well. CJ Stroud has, expedited his development to a point, or was just very good to begin with, like we kind of thought here. This passing offense has improved. The one thing with this offense that has not improved is the running game. But if you were to take, Dameon Pierce, who had a crap situation last year with the offensive line, the system itself, the quarterback he was playing with, and you statted him out for a full season. Remember, he missed some time last year. He would have been a top 13, top 14 running back last year, depending on your scoring format. And now we have this offense that is at least performing better from a passing standard. The running game has just not caught up yet. I think a good bit of that is the offensive line still being banged up. They're still not operating with their top talent at the offensive line. And keep in mind, this top talent at the offensive line was projected to be like bottom 5 coming into the season, and they've been working with very quote unquote subpar talent, but they've still been able to get a good bit out of it. So I'm hopeful coming out of this bye, maybe we see a little bit of resurgence from this running scheme just to have a little life to it. Hopefully Pierce gets some of that, quote unquote blowback or some of that ripple effect. And I do think the one thing with this trade is I am doing this as a hopeful depth piece, because you can't rely on him for much more than that
Yes,
at this point.
100%.
And I know that's kind of where you're at, but that's just my one defining thing is you can't be expecting to be able to chuck Pierce into your RB2 slot. I think he's capable of RB2 numbers. We haven't seen much of, if any of that yet this season. And Devin Singletary has been, outside of a game, a thorn in the side of managers to this point. Do I think he's going to usurp him or anything like that? No, I think Dameon Pierce is a really good running back. I think the buy low opportunity is there. I think people are very concerned with Dameon Pierce. You said the buy lows don't sound sexy at the time. That's why you're able to buy low. This is one of the ones where you're actually able to buy low, and he's very accessible at this point. I like to think things improve. That's the question mark, though, is you kind of got to be willing to, if you're a competitive team, stick your neck out a little bit on this one. Hopefully you got some extra draft capital kicking around in your war chest, where if you use, let's say, a late 24 second this year and a 25 third, you're not removing all of your draft capital for the next couple years, if that's what it were to take to get Dameon Pierce on your roster.
I want to add the caveat that
Sure.
I am buying Dameon Pierce to eventually return to the production that we saw last year.
That's the hope for sure.
Yeah. And is that this year? I don't know. I'm not spending a second round pick on a depth running back. I'll never do that. I am doing it for the short term, like the next 6 to 8 weeks. I am doing that with that belief. I agree with you 100%. But I'm banking on the fact that what you said about the offensive line is 100% right. Like they are depending on that offensive line, and that offensive line hasn't played up to its capabilities because of health, because of other determining factors where Dameon Pierce has not been able to be himself. So I just want to put that out there. I am no way ever advocate spending a second round pick on a depth running back. There are a lot of depth running backs you can pick up off the waiver wire every single week.
Sure.
I am expecting him to be a depth running back in the short term, and I'm hoping to get that production at some point down the line here. And that's why I mentioned I'm not worried about his situation for the next 2 years.
And just to clarify where I was mentioning depth, I meant more so as like startable depth, like just somebody you're not necessarily ready and willing and able to chuck into your starting lineup outside of a flex from week to week, but not somebody that's like a handcuff quality type player. That's not what I'm putting Pierce in the bucket of. I think, somebody who you could start if you have to, if he has a good matchup. I don't think you should be too afraid to throw him in if that's kind of your best option. But somebody that I do think 100% we want to see, we're expecting and projecting somewhat of an upward turn here for Dameon Pierce, should get plenty bit of the workload. They love him there. He's well liked in that franchise, in that building. So I like to think we see an upturn. Now is your time to buy low, especially heading into the bye week. Like you said, he's going to score 0 points next week. I can guarantee that much. Speaking of bye weeks, I'm talking some win now trade targets, some trade targets to look forward to hopefully subsidize players in your lineups over the few bye weeks that we have coming, and just players that have really good matchups in the next coming weeks, the next week, especially particularly. So our first bye-apocalypse at the doorstep, which we'll call it here. I've seen it called a few other things in the Twitter sphere, in the X sphere, I guess you could call it now. Let's talk about some players that we can not only have get us through this bye week, but possibly through injuries, so on and so forth, that have good matchups ahead. First one for me, I'm looking at Brian Robinson going against the New York Giants this coming week. On the fringe of a first or a second round pick value-wise, I'd be looking to send a 24 second plus 25 thirds, something in that range. He's had one really good week. Outside of that, he's been startable. Definitely not a bad running back, but just not, hasn't had that big blow up week again. And I think we can kind of agree that the feelings have simmered on Brian Robinson, where he's, somewhat accessible again. He's not coming off a 30-point game, a little more easy to get in on the ground floor of. And maybe you have to throw a little bit more. Maybe if you're a competitive team and you're feeling good about your team next year as well, throwing a 24-second this year and a 25-second, next year might be something you're willing to do as well. Brian Robinson is a nice piece to have for a little bit too. I don't think he's a one-year fix. I don't think he's a Band-Aid. I think you can have him for another year or two on your roster as a startable, flexible running back. Some matchups might even be able to slot in as a running back too. Another running back I want to go look forward to try to get is Jerome Ford going up against Indianapolis next week. Somebody who is mostly going to be looked at as a Band-Aid, like I said, compared to Brian Robinson, who has a little bit more secured longevity with the franchise. Jerome Ford is filling in for Nick Chubb at this point. He's an activated handcuff, not a long-term solution. Currently valued around a mid to late second-round pick. You might need to use another shiny object to get this deal done. It's a tricky situation because you don't feel great about the long-term aspects of Jerome Ford like you would a second-round pick. So maybe you have a second-round pick that's looking more early to mid, and you can trade that for Jerome Ford plus a third-round pick. So you kind of get the pick downgrade, but you get the player to fill in the meantime, and you still get some longevity on top of the player whose situation might not be perfect. And just to, wrap up, being the tricky situation, not believing he's a long-term solution, you shouldn't necessarily believe that any running back at the price point of a mid to late second should be a long-term solution. That's kind of the price you get to pay for that not being the case. And then one wide receiver who I really want to get on my roster, and not only for the sake of the bye week. You mentioned this, I think, week 2 moves to make, Zach. Going and getting yourself Jakobi Meyers. Has a great matchup against Chicago coming up this week. Meyers might be one of the best buy lows in Dynasty right now. If you need a bye week or injury fill-in that you can acquire at wide receiver, 3 prices, but put up wide receiver 2 numbers, valued between an early to mid second. This is a great value for Meyers. I'd be happy sending a 24 second and a 25 third to try to get this deal done. Something we've talked about a little bit on the channel is kind of staggering out picks if you have to send multiple picks, as opposed to, and by staggering, I mean staggering out picks over the next couple of years, as opposed to sending 2 in the same year. You kind of get to maintain your draft capital pool heading into next season. It doesn't matter as much if you already have kind of excess picks in each round outside of your own, or more than the 1 pick in that round. It's not as much of a benefit, but it's just something where you can kind of add that much more value onto a deal and soften the blow to yourself that little bit of when you have to kind of pay the piper, so to speak. But for me, why to make these trades, bye weeks and injuries, especially, we're getting hammered, with injuries and bye weeks, this bye week falling, at a really bad time. And I mentioned the 2 running backs because you look at startable running backs this week, it gets ugly quick. Like there's going to be a lot of rough running back rooms going around your Dynasty league this week, unless somebody's absolutely stacked. But bye weeks, especially ones like this, injuries that we've been dealing with, make it really hard to set good lineups. But if you can set yourself apart and still find ways to set a competitive lineup, you can use this to help get ahead and stay ahead of your league mates. If you're still just fine adding these, startable depth pieces that you can put into a flex while you're, putting in your wide receiver 3 into your wide receiver 2 slot and just moving everybody up a slot, and you're getting somebody that's not just a replacement level player, that's a waiver wire piece or close to being a waiver wire piece off waivers in your starting lineup. Instead, you're going to be ahead of your league mates that much more. These players are very acquirable right now. They're very accessible. These aren't super expensive players. These guys aren't going to break the bank by any stretch of the imagination. Jakobi Meyers on Keep Trade Cut. I know everybody likes to hate on Keep Trade Cut, but that's okay. Listed around wide receiver 40 at this point. This guy has had 1 week outside of that he played a full game in that he was less than a wide receiver 2. Come on. He's going to be 27 years old before the end of the season. So I get some hesitation there, but he's putting up great numbers in Las Vegas right now. Go get him while you still can, because I promise you, he's scoring touchdowns out there. That was a big concern for him out in New England. He's scoring touchdowns now. He's getting plenty of receptions and targets. He is a feature in this offense. I implore you to try to go get Jakobi Meyers on your roster. If nothing else, if you don't just want to go get bye week fill-ins, Jakobi Meyers is somebody who could be a wide receiver 3 for you for the rest of the season, period. End of story. And probably next season as well. Zach, I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of these bye week fill-ins, and if you're chasing any of them as well, or if you just agree with the process of, trying to make your lineup the best as you can. And I think that's what this strategy boils down to, or this trade targets, I guess, boils down to, is just trying to make your lineup as best as you can. Here's some accessible targets for you that aren't going to break the bank. Zach, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I don't want to say I never, but a lot of the times I like to buy more available options for a better bargain, right? I don't have any shares of Christian McCaffrey in any of my leagues. Like, it's just not the way that I approach. I don't overpay for the running back position. I love the names that you brought up. Look, man, Brian Robinson right now is the RB1. Say what you will about his week to week production. Through 6 weeks, he's an RB1. And that's with one game where he was game scripted out because they were down 27-3 at the half. And that's a whole nother discussion, because he actually did well in the few snaps he had in that second half of that game. But this is a good point, because there are going to be weeks where, but like, I'm not trying to buy a player for 1 week, and I don't think that's the point you were making. I just want to make sure people don't get that point lost. But like, it's going to get dicey. Like, you think it's bad now? Wait another 3 weeks. Wait another 4 weeks, man. This is a yearly thing. This happens all the time in Dynasty or in fantasy football, where you just get mollywopped by injuries, man. Like, that's what's happening right now. And it gets worse and worse as we go throughout the season, and it's not going to get any better. So if you can get some of these pieces that you're talking about, Bob, at a reasonable price, depending on your Dynasty situation, I totally 100% agree, and love the names you brought up, man. Can't disagree with anything you said.
Touching on the one thing you said, not getting any of these guys for just 1 week. Don't let small short-term needs impact your long-term longevity of, don't send these second or third round picks for guys that are only going to help you for a couple weeks. Last week's hot waiver wire ad was DeMarcado was the hot waiver wire ad, barely even played. And people were trading third round picks for the guy. And what remorse would you have now trading away a third round pick? Where I get third round picks or dart throws, say as you will, but you can't replace that value now that you've lost trying to plug a hole for a couple weeks. Just something to think about. Don't let those short-term needs make long-term problems for you by shipping off assets you don't have to. I'd rather take the L than just take a long-term L. You know what I mean? If it's 1 week, it's 1 week. If you're so hamstrung with injuries this week that you can barely set a lineup anyway, is one player going to really fix it for you, or is one player just going to hamper you to a point where you're losing a pick where you don't need to? Then I just roll over, let it happen, I guess. Take a week off in that league. It is what it is. Zach, I love this next pick of yours, this buy of yours, a guy I just actually went and acquired in a league, but I'll tell you about that trade in my next point. So, Zach, why don't you dive on in to your next buy?
Yeah, I feel like I'm coming a little bit late here, and I know I said 5 minutes ago I don't buy the Christian McCaffreys, I don't buy the expensive running backs, but there is one that I'm liking a lot, and I'm not mad at Nate. I'm just disappointed that he talked me off this cliff in the offseason, because in the offseason it was all about Tank Bigsby. And I fell for it. And it's not that you guys or what Nate said was wrong about Tank Bigsby, but you were wrong in his effect in this backfield. And I looked at the Tank Bigsby snap share. It's not increasing. It's not getting higher. His role isn't really all that much other than a handcuff running back at this point. And I'm frustrated at that, because I want to buy Travis Etienne, an elite running back at this point, where we are in Dynasty Fantasy Football. Last year finished as RB17 in his first full season, and in his second season thus far, he is the RB3 through 6 weeks. Here's another thing, Bob. Travis Etienne missed his entire rookie year. The Jaguars have had 23 regular season games since his rookie year. How many games do you think Travis Etienne has missed? 0.
Really?
He has missed 0 games since
heavily
his rookie
limited
season.
In one then.
Well, he might have played and got hurt in the first quarter.
Yeah, you made your point though. He's been very healthy.
0 misses, 0 games missed so far. RB3 through 6 weeks on the season, 4 weeks as an RB1, 2 weeks above 20 points of fantasy production. I really feel like I missed the Travis Etienne bus, and I want to get on, man. Like, I'm chasing this bus down. I'm banging on the bus. Let me in, man. Let me in this bus. I missed out on it. I was all about the Tank Bigsby hype. You, Nate, y'all talked me into it. We were wrong. We talk about this all the time, Bob. We have to realize when we are wrong, and it's time to change our point of view. And it is time to change our point of view on Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, because all last season it was, oh, Tank Bigsby's going to carve out a role. He's Doug Peterson's draft pick. Ha, 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 ha. And lo and behold, it's not that at all. I'm sorry, guys. Like, it's the opposite. So what am I paying for Travis Etienne now? Well, I looked on DLF. I'm buying Travis. Look, he's 24 years old. So I'm not buying Travis Etienne as a rebuilding team unless I feel like I can compete in 2024. However, I wouldn't do that until the offseason. I'm not trading for points right now if I'm a rebuilding team.
Agreed.
If I'm a team in the middle or a contending team, I will send out my first round pick. And then I want to throw out some names here that DLF gave me. It's a late first round pick plus this player, and you tell me if that gets the deal done. Okay? Travis Etienne for a 24 first round pick and Najee Harris.
I mean, if Najee had a pulse this year, if you would have sent me this coming into the season, I would have been very tempted. But right now, I need a little more out of Najee before I can be real excited about this deal.
24 first round pick and Jahan Dotson.
Interested if I'm rebuilding, but probably need a bit more, maybe.
Okay. And then last but not least, 24 first round pick, and this would be a tier down for the opponent, Dameon Pierce.
I don't hate it, but I think it just goes to show how Travis Etienne right now is a tough buy, a tough get. I think you're adding a little bit more, or just shinier objects, I think is the problem with that, because the first is nice. The first is a nice starting point, but I think the problem is Najee's had a rough go. Jahan Dotson, rough go. Again, if you sent me any of these in the preseason, I'm thinking about it. I'd be pretty close to in on those deals. Definitely not for sure, but I think 100% you want to get in on this player before it's any later. I think we've seen enough that a couple takeaways. Just because we like players, I think Tank Bigsby is talented enough where he does get something out of this offense at some point. Etienne's getting a lot of work. I don't think that kills Etienne, and I think that was the disconnect, is just because we believe a player is good and he can carve out a role doesn't mean it's just going to kill another player. I think that's the big takeaway. And then, like you said, too, being able to be willing to change your mind and be open to that and do it quickly once you see evidence in front of you that you can say, hey, idiot, you're wrong, fix your opinion or change your mind, or, make the necessary moves to do this right. I just recently went and got Travis Etienne as well. But I'm 100% in on trying to go get Travis Etienne. If you're competitive, this would be a really, really nice running back for you to go and get. If it's your running back one, if you can't get in on, CMC or Bijan Robinson or any of the other top guys, I think Travis Etienne is the next tier of good running backs at this point. And I think there's still a slight window where you can get him at a good value, but that's closing very soon, if not already.
Let me just give you some stats real quick to show you how elite he's been through the first 6 weeks of the season. All right. Last 4 weeks, 4 less targets than Christian McCaffrey. Travis Etienne leads the NFL in touches right now, Bob. And in terms of scrimmage yards, he's 4th in the NFL behind Tyreek Hill, Christian McCaffrey, and A.J. Brown. Travis Etienne is an elite running back now. We need to come to grips with it. Okay. Yeah. I know this is the channel that loved Tank Bigsby, but Travis Etienne is playing elite football right now. Week 5, he led the NFL in forced missed tackles. I don't know about week 6 because it just happened as of recording this, but he is playing at an elite level, and he is getting elite level volume in terms of the running back carries, catches out of the backfield, and overall scrimmage yards and touches. We just have to come to grips with that. And I'm sorry, Tank Bigsby lovers. I'm just the messenger.
I don't think anybody's going to be too disappointed with that except Nate, mostly. But again, live and learn and adjust. When you see what's happening, you have 2 choices. You can bury your head in the sand and have take lock, or you can get on the bus before it leaves the station. I think there's still some time before he is regarded as a top 3 running back, top 4 running back, along with the Breece Hall, Bijan, and CMC. He probably should be pretty close to that already, in all honesty. But speaking of which, I did just go get myself Travis Etienne. Who did I move to do it? We'll see when I talk about this next segment, talking about a tier up trade / pivot. We talked about it a couple weeks ago. Me and Nate did, about what the heck to do with Jahmyr Gibbs. What's the move to make with Jahmyr Gibbs? And while I think there's definitely reason to hold on, Jahmyr Gibbs, he's a rookie, still finding his footing in the NFL. That's fine. But I'm looking for ways as a competitive team. That's important. As a competitive team, I'm looking for ways to move off of and pivot off of Jahmyr Gibbs for a higher value, productive asset before it's too late. Because Jahmyr Gibbs' value right now is possibly going to go up because Dave Montgomery is expected to miss some time. Everybody is going to expect Jahmyr Gibbs to shoot up. His usage is going to go crazy. He's going to get all the main rushing work. All of these things are just going to come to fruition for Jahmyr Gibbs, not thinking that he's, missed the last 2 weeks of practice with a hamstring injury, missed the last 2 weeks with a hamstring injury, so on and so forth. Call me impatient, but you should be too. If you need points and you're just hoping for Jahmyr Gibbs to get points, you can't go on with him burning a hole in your starting roster or what lately has been an IR spot. Montgomery, when healthy, is the bell cow here. Plain and simple. He's going to get most of the work. He's going to get most of the productive touches. Gibbs will get some receiving work down the line. But again, you're just dealing with a volatile running back when you could pivot to something better. We'll talk about it. But ultimately, Jahmyr Gibbs just never going to be the primary option. And the coaches have said this. The coaches have said that Dave Montgomery is who they want to utilize primarily as the running back in their system. And Jahmyr Gibbs is a change of pace back. Take notice. Like you've been saying, I'm just the messenger. I'm sorry. And there are ways to move off of Gibbs incorrectly, one of which I think is just selling him straight up for future draft picks. I don't think you should just sell him to re-roll. I think that's the only way that you can really get off of him poorly, unless you're confident that you're, getting some stupid return where you're getting a top 3 pick in Superflex next year and you're rebuilding anyway. Because if you need points, moving Gibbs for not points doesn't help you either. The correct move, I believe, to make with Jahmyr Gibbs is utilizing him to tier up to a player who's actually producing, keyword there, instead of waiting on the long-term upside to maybe be realized. We can all agree that Gibbs is a very electric, exciting, fun player, but on a competitive roster, he's still valued as a top 8 dynasty running back, despite having no production. He's had some production, but no elite levels of production. It's time to trade up before that valuation dips even further, and it becomes harder to get to one of these top running backs that I'm looking to get to. Can I use Jahmyr Gibbs plus to tier up to Travis Etienne? Can I send a second along with Jahmyr Gibbs to tier up Travis Etienne if I need points? In exchange for Jahmyr Gibbs and at first, can I get to Breece Hall? Can I do the same thing to try to go get CMC or Bijan Robinson? Can I do any of these trades? Can I do any of these? Can I put these two side by side and figure out a deal? Because I'm done waiting on production from Jahmyr Gibbs. And I think you might get it this week. I think you might be coming into a really nice sell window for Jahmyr Gibbs with him having what we believe to be more work in the backfield with Montgomery being out. You might have a lot more people willing to buy in because he's going to be getting more work. But at the end of the day, this is another case of just a general dynasty mistake. This is another case of just romanticizing what could be instead of just going and getting what already is. Number 1 on my list of players that I want to go get is Travis Etienne. And I did that this week in a league with you. I went and moved off of Jahmyr Gibbs and I went and paid up to go get Travis Etienne on my roster. I think there was a bunch of other pieces in the deal, but I think it about equated to me moving a second on top of Gibbs to go get Etienne with all the other pieces that were kind of mixed in there. I don't want to dive into it because it just gets kind of lost in translation, IMO. I get it. Like, Gibbs is a great player, fun player, but just give me the player who's already doing it and the player who's already putting up points. Let's call it a day. Let's go home, win the league now instead of, like I said, waiting on the production that may or may not ever come up. Zach, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this with Jahmyr Gibbs. Very polarizing player and polarizing discussion, I'm sure. But I think if there's anybody who can relate to what I'm saying here, it's you. You get it. You get the competitive drive. What do you got here for me?
I'm glad I have 0 shares of Jahmyr Gibbs, and that's not to say that I don't think at some point he'll be what
Right.
everyone thinks he's going to be. Um,
Yeah.
you just know the way I approach situations. It's like I just don't do headaches, man.
Yeah.
I had 0 shares of DeAndre Swift. I have 0 shares of Jahmyr Gibbs. And I would even say there's a potential in week 7 that Craig Reynolds has more carries out of the backfield in Detroit. Let's go back to week 5.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Let's go back to week 5 when David Montgomery left the game. Who stepped in and got the
Yep.
bulk of the running work in that game while
Yep.
Montgomery was out? Craig Reynolds, 7 carries. It's 52 yards. I feel bad. Feel bad for the dynasty community because, it's like
Yeah.
everybody thought they had this special running back. And look, at some point, the Lions' draft capital spent on Jahmyr Gibbs would tell me that they're going to feature him more. I don't know when that is.
Yeah.
And I don't want to try to guess when that is because
Yeah.
it could not be. It could be next year. It could be 2 years down the line. They have him there for 5 years, Bob. There's no rush for them to make him be the bell cow running back that they don't seem to want him to be right now.
Yeah. Especially when they already have Dave Montgomery, who's been plenty capable outside of a couple injuries now of being the bell cow, being the feature back. And then you have to get into the discussion of there's only so much fantasy output a offense can have. So if you're expecting Sam Laporta to be a tight end 1, which he's valued at now, Amon-Ra St. Brown to be wide receiver 3 in Dynasty, where he's valued around now, Jahmyr Gibbs to be a top 10 running back in Dynasty, and people are still out there shouting from the rooftops, how's Jameson Williams doing? I know he had a long touchdown this week, but how's that 23% snaps and 3 targets a game going? Sorry, not sorry, but maybe a little sorry. I don't want to be crass. I know people just like him, and I think he's a fine talent too, but I just think at the end of the day, you have to look at what this NFL offense is going to do and what that's going to do to generate fantasy points for you. I just don't think there's enough to go around. Somebody's missing a slice of the pie here. Somebody's not getting fed. And maybe that's a week-to-week issue, but it seems like Amon-Ra's going to get fed. Seems like Laporta's going to get fed. Montgomery's going to get fed. There's 3 options. You're telling me there's going to be 5 top options in this offense? I'm a little speculative at that thought. With that in the books, I do hope you all enjoyed. Please leave a like if you did. Comment down below your thoughts on the video itself. Let us know what moves you're making and what you thought about the moves we're making today. We talked a lot of running backs. Let us know what running backs you're trying to target or move off of in your leagues for sure. If you need more help with trades and trade advice, hop on over to Discord, patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. That link will be in the description as well as the pinned comment below. But hey, with all that said, that is going to be it for us today. We will see you in the next one. But until then, I hope that y'all have a good one.